الحمد لله رب العالمين الله في أموري يستعين وإنه الله الرحمن الرحيم الغفور الرحيم إنني أوفي له امتناني وشكري و وأنا أوفي بيتي على كتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم محمد هو سيدنا محبوبنا إننا نحبه ونتبعه وسنته وشريعته نحافظون صلوات الله تعالى وسلامه عليه. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته للإخوان وأخواتي في دين وكل مكان. Thank you, my dear brothers and sisters. Thank you for coming today. Those who may show up here, inshallah. Ahlan wa sahlan bikum. You're welcome. Thank you for being here to listen to your brother speak on a very important topic. As the whole topics of the Quran and the Sunnah is always important. Assalamu alaikum, my dear sister Abina. Assalamu alaikum, my dear sister Amina. The title, if you saw there in Arabic, the Aizatum, للمؤمنين الذين يحكموا في Sharia Allah. The glory to the mu'mineen who used the Sharia and governed by the Sharia. And we show this history, and it not only inclusive the Africa, but all the empires of for almost 1,000 years at least, who ran the Sharia, how successful they were. And when they got away from the Sharia, then calamities began to happen. And this is something that has transpired over and over again. We'll have the Sharia, and then we'll get weak in it, and then we'll have calamities. And you see what has happened to the Muslim world today. They're governed by the enemy, who have a ungodly hold over it. And a lot of it is our fault because we went away from the Sharia. And one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this subject, because the African sultanates that transpired was some of the richest in history, but yet they never are discussed. We know why that is. And they don't talk about these empires for obvious reasons, because they want to keep us on the narrative of slavery and after slavery inside America, or the colonial period. That's what they want to have us concentrate on. And they don't want us to talk about the great empires. There were great empires that weren't Islamic as well. But the Islamic empires came at a time, and they were flourishing at the time as the colonial period began to put its grip over Africa, especially West Africa and North Africa. The Muslims fought diligently to block them. Of course, we know they were defeated. And we know one thing is that the Muslim who governs by the Sharia, there's things that's happened in this particular arena when they live by the Sharia. Then Subhanahu wa ta'ala rewarded them with so many different gifts. Some even unlocked the mysteries of the earth, like the first map by a Muslim. Subhanahu wa ta'ala gave a lot of information to the Prophet ﷺ, and we uncovered a lot of mysteries that were recently discovered within the last 100 years. So it goes to show you just how important Subhanahu wa ta'ala's law is. So I will start here. One of the proofs of what I'm talking about here is the Sharia. And I'll get into about the Sharia. is Surah 45, verse 18. I will read this in English language. Qala subhanahu wa ta'ala says here, then we put you on the right way of religion. So follow that way. Don't follow the desires of those who do not know. Interesting. The Sharia, salam alaikum, my dear brother Isaac, thank you for coming. The Sharia is a law that was handed down from subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he was giving it to the prophets, and each one had his share of it, and he governed under it, and he taught it, and he enforced it. And subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you in this verse, again, which holds true today, don't follow those who are outside of his law. And we have that today. And you see what has happened? The calamities, the turmoil that we have, because we are following others. We're not following the Quran, the law of subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we're not following the law of the Prophet as well. We're not following that. So we have this problem. And subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you, don't follow these particular doctrines because it will lead you astray. And we see that today. Has led us astray. We have Muslims who are far removed from the Quran and from the way of the Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam, far removed, because they decided to follow something else. So subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you in this verse here, you follow the right. And what is the right way? It's his law. It's his law. And the law of our Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam, the Sharia, to follow that. And good things come of that when you do follow that, as we will talk about, inshallah ta'ala here. Now, we know in history, subhanahu wa ta'ala gave a lot to those who govern under the Sharia. I mean, wars, protection, wealth. And we know that. And we see this in history. Now, what about the Sharia? What do we know about the Sharia? Because there's a lot of misunderstanding about the Sharia. Because if you look at CNN or MSNBC or some of the think tanks of the United States or Europe, they'll tell you the Sharia is a killing law where Muslims basically have at will kill women, kill disbelievers, kill its own population without right, draconian laws that don't protect anyone, lawlessness. I mean, you name it. All that is what they consider the Sharia, when in fact they know the exact opposite of that. We know that subhanahu wa ta'ala created that for us. The Sharia is one of the meanings is that it was created for us, meaning it gives us a way of life. It gives you this way of life to lead you to the straight path and lead you away from the things to the devil that causes the problems we see today. That's one of the meanings of the Sharia. It was created for the human being, for him, so he'll have laws to govern himself. And those who had power to govern, they would have this law as well to govern its people. And that way it makes people prosper. And do it without coercion. You remember one of my discussions I talked about, subhanahu wa ta'ala said that he makes the Muslims, but he gives the human being the choice. He will give you the prophets to learn from. But if you decide you don't want to learn from him, that's your problem that you will have in the hereafter, because he give you the proof, but he's not going to force you to become Muslim. He will not. So there's no coercion in accepting that, except one of the things. If you say if you are governing and you decide to govern with something else, then you have to deal with subhanahu wa ta'ala again in his time, when he gives this time, and when Yom Kiyama, the day of reckoning, you would have to answer for that. The second thing that we should understand is that it's a doctrine for the life of the person. It's good that you know the laws, because it keeps you straight. When you walk out of the house, you know that you're not to go and get narcotics. You know that you're not to go to steal. You know that you're not to go out to fornicate. You're not to go out there and commit slander and to steal and to rob and to kill. This is the Sharia. So it gives the Muslim, in particular, those laws where he understands when he steps out that he cannot do this, he cannot do this, he cannot do that, and he understands that. And that's the beauty and the blessing of the Sharia, because it's clear cut. It says don't steal, so you don't steal. It says don't fornicate, and it says don't go to intoxicants. It's simple. It gives you those laws that for the human being to keep you straight and keep your nation strong. The other meaning of the Sharia means the characteristics on how to worship, the worship subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you understand and you live under the Sharia and you're governed by the Sharia, it's easier for you to understand why you worship subhanahu wa ta'ala, because you will see the bounty all the way around you under the Sharia. Under other doctrines, you don't see it. You see imbalances. You see extreme wealth and you see extreme poverty. You see some goodness here, but then you see a lot of bad here. And this is what happens when there's a disruption in the law, subhanahu wa ta'ala's law, that you're not following. For it's a command, again, to do what is right, to forbade what is wrong, and to have the responsibilities under it. Meaning, if you decide to go away from the Sharia and you want to go and rob and steal, well, you suffer the consequences under the law, under that. And that law is the same. Now, there's differences and so forth about as far as what happens, because there's, we have the hadiths where people had stole and they were so poor. They were so hungry, they took something and they weren't punished for it because there was injustices done to this particular individual. The Qadi would look at in that if he's caught stealing to see who this person is and why he stole. Another thing is the Sharia is what? It helps you and guides you to the right path. And then the Sharia is the way of all of the prophets. All the prophets were given laws. Subhanahu wa ta'ala gave laws. Some were lesser than the other, but still there were laws that governed him. And the prophets enforced the law as well. So this is another meaning of the Sharia, is that the all of the prophets had it, they taught it, and they enforced it. That's right. So the Sharia is nothing new, to be honest. Now, we know that that each Khalifa or sultanate that was used in the past, and they used the Sharia, we know that the subhanahu wa ta'ala gave victories, wealth beyond belief to those who govern under that. And we know this, we see this, and I'll discuss some of this here shortly, inshallah. We know that riches came from this bounty of subhanahu wa ta'ala because they were governing under his law, and that he made sure to take care of those particular kingdoms, the caliphates and the sultanates that were actually sultanates who were actually governing. And you see some of the richest, most powerful empires that the world has known, great majority were Muslim, and some came out of Africa as well. And that's interesting. And I'll cover something else to you. This may shock some of you when I'm going to tell you about another set of sultans who were black, who governed somewhere else outside of Africa, and what happened to that particular empires as well. The caliphates who governed gave rights to the woman. He gave rights to the woman. It gave the rights to the woman. When you saw the health of the nation by how she was treated, you see, she was educated, she was free, she produced children because she was educated, and the Khilafah, the Sultanate was allowed to flourish because generations were educated. Who is the greatest educator? We know that is to be our women. The sister, she's our educator. And so when she's educated, she's going to educate the children. So this is why some of the empire stayed for a long period of time, because the children were educated. And you see the problems today. When you have a population that's not educated, you see the problems that you have in those countries. And we have that all over the place in Africa. And it's a sad fact that you, in this modern time, that you have populations at 40, 50, 60% illiterate. I mean, that's incredible. So how can you build and prosper as a nation when you violate subhanahu wa ta'ala's law? And his law is to educate everyone. There's no superiority, meaning a man over a woman, meaning that the man is to be educated, the woman is not. That is not the case at all, because the education is for all Muslims. And we understand this is why the verses in Surah 60, as I talked about last week, are so important, because it gives the Muslim the understanding, especially about the importance of the sister, that how she cannot be turned over to the disbelievers. Because why? She's important, a important asset in any Khilafah, under any sultan. She's a very important. More so, you think about the sultans. Have you noticed something? They pick certain women to have children, right? Why? Because they want their sons, in particular, to be strong, educated. So they have to pick of certain women. That's how important that the sister is as far as building a nation. And what happens when the country doesn't abide by subhanahu wa ta'ala's law? Interesting, isn't it? We see this all over the place today. The second surah, 187, excuse me, the third surah, third surah, it's not the second, third surah, 187, Al Imran, subhanahu wa ta'ala, okay. He says here, and I'll read it. And remember, Allah took a covenant from the people of the book to make it known and clear to mankind, not to hide it, but to throw it away behind their backs and purchase with it some miserable gain. And vile was the bargain they made. We know in our previous talks that our brothers who are close to us in religion, our Jews and Christians, violated the trust of subhanahu wa ta'ala. They took their books and what they did is they began to pervert it and made subhanahu wa ta'ala very angry, as you know. And so this is what he's talking about in essence here. And remember, a couple of weeks ago, I gave you a term where we call it tahrif al-kalam, where you pervert the words of subhanahu wa ta'ala. You make the people believe that the words of that these are the words of subhanahu wa ta'ala, when in fact it's not. And he gives you in here the warning. And so you should understand that subhanahu wa ta'ala is merciful, but he's not merciful for those who vacate his law. Now, a person who says he's a mu'min, meaning he's a deep believer, he says he deeply believes, and yet and still, when there's a problem between him and his Muslim brother, he uses democratic ways and means to deal with his brother, or he used communist method or style, or he used some other type of thing from desires from his own heart. And he doesn't use the Sharia when he has a problem with his brother. Subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in Surah 4:65, he says here, but no, by the Lord, they cannot have no real faith until they make you judge all disputes between them and find to their souls no resistance against your decisions, but accept them with the fullness conviction. That says it all. Subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you right here, you cannot have no real faith. You cannot be a mu'min. And matter of fact, you are on the borderline when you leave all of the laws of Subhanahu wa ta'ala and the laws of the Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam, and you govern by your own. You are almost out of the door. You have 1 foot out of Islam and you have 1 foot in Islam. When you begin to vacate his law, and when you begin to vacate his law, what happens? The devil becomes involved in it. And then at this point, you begin to do things all on your own. You want to stay in power 40, 50, 60 years. You want to govern, you leave the law so you govern where it helps you and those cronies under you. These are the type of things what happens when Subhanahu wa ta'ala's laws are forbidden. And he talks about this. You cannot say you are a mu'min. You cannot say you are a deep believer in Islam when you use other methods to govern by. When there's a dispute between your husband and wife, you don't go to the democratic courts or the courts. But I know in the United States you have no choice in that regard. But they don't govern by man-made. They're governed by man-made laws, and the man. I mean, we know what's happening. I shouldn't have to get into that. But you should not use laws that do not cover, that are not falling under the laws of Subhanahu wa ta'ala to go after your wife or to go after your husband. But we have that today. And devastating effects, as we know, devastating effects. So you cannot say you are a mu'min and then you turn around and say, well, there's some things I like about the Sharia. There's other things I don't like about the Sharia. That's bad news. You're not a mu'min. You're a Muslim, and you have 1 foot in faith and out. The second foot is out of faith because you are dangling in between faith and disbelief when you leave the laws of Subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's dangerous, my dear sisters and brothers. That's very dangerous. And when the Muslim begins to use laws that are not from him, this is where the draconian laws come in. You see all through Africa, Asia, all over the place, even in European countries. You see draconian laws being put into place because discrimination comes in. Racism is used. There's sexism is used. There's discrimination against women. There's inequities of all sorts. This happens because Subhanahu wa ta'ala's law has been violated. And the same Surah 4:60 and verse 60. Subhanahu wa ta'ala says, have you turned your vision to those who declare that they believe in revelations and have come to you and to those before you? The real wish is to resort together for judgment in their disputes to the evil one. Interesting. Though they were ordered to reject him, meaning Jews, Christians, and Muslims were ordered to reject the devil and his way. But Satan's wish is to lead them astray, far away from the right. This is Surah 4 and verse 60. Subhanahu wa ta'ala is again, he's pointing out for the Muslim, and even if you were Christian or Jew, makes no difference, because there's laws that Subhanahu wa ta'ala gave to the prophets before. John the Baptist did not follow democratic ways and means. He didn't follow the communist methods. He didn't follow some Shinto. He didn't follow any voodoo or any type of other type of religion. He followed and enforced Subhanahu wa ta'ala's laws. And he was strong in it. And so here, Subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling people are resorting to what? To the evil one for decisions. And it's true. You look around the world. And again, when we look at the empires began strong, but then as they begin to weaken, they begin to govern under what? Less than the Sharia. And Subhanahu wa ta'ala removed his hand in protection, and they were defeated, and so forth. And this happens all through history. So this particular verse 60 here tells you, you don't resort to the evil one. You resort to the Sharia. When there's a dispute between us, even the Muslim and a dispute with the non-Muslim, you resort to the decisions of Subhanahu wa ta'ala. You don't use other methods to do it because you find yourself in trouble. Okay. Now we'll talk about the sultanates and that occurred in Africa. All of them have particular characteristics that were very interesting, and why they were so successful, and why the historians, meaning mainly the Tubab Europeans and many of the Arabs historians as well, have left off about the caliphates and the sultanates and the emirates that occurred in Africa. A lot of it's out of discrimination, out of hatred, and racial hatred. We know the picture about that. As an African American, we are accustomed to knowing this for 400 years, that how we were discriminated against. Even our history is even discriminated against. And the sultanates had something important. You know that the power of the nation is by what? The masajids. If you look at read the history of the empires of the African empires, and when they traveled, they built masjids everywhere. That's the sign of deep faith. They made masjids everywhere. And the people had choices to go to masjids. They were nearby. They weren't long distance like they are today. The masjids are far apart from the people. In those times, under the zenith of their power, they had masjids everywhere. Beautiful. And some are still standing today. In some pictures and drawings, they were beautiful. And so the people had easy access to worship inside the masjids. This is important. That's how you know the health of the caliphate. You know the health of the sultanate or the emirate is by the masajids. If you walk into an emirate and you see one or two masjids only, that's not a healthy country. But if you see masajids every place, every half or quarter kilometer, even less than that, there's 2 or 3 masjids for the Muslims to go to. You know this place is healthy. You know it's healthy. Second, you look in the empires of the African empires, you see the sisters in it. If you saw the drawings of some of our African sisters in those emirates, in those sultanates, they were beautiful. Those sisters were beautiful. I've seen many drawings that I'm talking about the Tubab and some other some of the scribes drew, but some of the Tubabs drew most of them. And they drew pictures of sisters. And the sisters look happy because they were governed very well. And we know the African empires, they always had sisters who were scholars also. That's what make our empires in Africa quite different than the others, because in ours, we trained our sisters to be scholars as well. That's right. And you read the history. That's how you know that you can tell the difference between the African sultanates and the others elsewhere. We have many sisters scholars. I mean, many. That's the difference. And it's funny, they left all that out. Interesting, isn't it? 3, they governed, again, by the Sharia. Not parts of the Sharia, but by the Sharia. 100% by the Sharia and what they knew of it. And those who in time vacated it, of course, the empires began to crumble. But they governed by Subhanahu wa ta'ala's laws. Then, the other thing that was also important is that you find the balance. Now, remember what I was talking about earlier. If you look at the countries today and you judge them on faith versus debauchery, okay, for instance, when you see a country where debauchery is very high and you see the faith, Iman, very low, that country's in trouble. When you see that there's half and half the country's full of debauchery and the other half is full of Iman, faith is in trouble. In the African empires, the balance was very top heavy, meaning the Iman of the African caliphates, the sultanates, the emirates that occurred in the African continents were the Iman was extremely high and the debauchery was low. They had it. You're never going to stop it. Every generation, you're going to have that. But you've seen this ratio where the Iman was very high and the debauchery is very low. That's the distinguishing thing about the African sultanates. And then the children. If you look at the African sultanates and the emirates, you saw the children. They were educated. They spoke Arabic language. They were taught Arabic language plus their own language, and they learned how to read and write. This is the difference too between some of our African empires who are not Islamic versus the Islamic empires in Africa, because there was the training and the teaching and the Quran, which demands that you learn the Quran not only by speaking it, by using your eyes to read it, and also using your hand to what? To write it. Now, I'm gonna go into another part here, and then we start on the caliphates. The Sharia, one of the definitions and meanings and emphasis is that the Sharia is everywhere, from the tongue, in the heart, in the eyes, in the action. This is the real Sharia, and it's followed and it's adhered to. When you see this, you see these African empires and some of the other empires as well. You see them under the Sharia, and you see the same type of doctrine, and you see the same type of prosperity, and it's beautiful. Now, we'll get into the African empires. You know, when I was in college, when I was in high school, matter of fact, when I was in elementary school and high school as well, and junior high, I told this story before, how I was always ashamed when we got into world history, because when we got to Africa, they always told us there was no history in Africa. The African history only began with slavery. And I remember as a black boy, you know, especially when we moved away from Compton, California, I went into Carson at the time. It was mainly 99.9% white and a few enclaves of blacks to the south of Carson. And when we got to the school, when we got into the history, I see all the kids look at me because I'm black. We got there, they start to you know, snicker and so forth and so on when it got to African history. And I felt ashamed because the history was not, you know, we had no history. I didn't really understand. But as I got a little older, my father, as he would start bringing magazines and books, I began to start reading. And then I began to read on my own. And then when I got to the university, of course, I began to read more and start finding these things out. And the first one I'm going to talk about that you may not even know is that the Andalus meaning Spain, you know, the conqueror, it was a black owned, black operated empire that began, and the black people ran it, called the Moors. Now, in modern times, now we're talking about from Morocco, the northern part. Now, let me give you some definitions here on my Africa. My Africa stretches from the west to the east, and the western tip is not Morocco, but actually Spain as we know it today. If you look at the DNA of many of the Spanish and Portuguese, they got quite a bit of African blood in them. That's right, because we've always been there. So I include that as our northwest Africa is Spain, as you said today, in Portugal. And to our east, as I explained before, Saudi Arabia, Oman, Yemen as our eastern tip of Africa. That's my definition of it. There's been disputes because the modern racist historian has painted the Moors as white. Interesting, isn't it? And these empires came almost 100 years after, close to 100 years after the Prophet ﷺ died, about 711, 714 or so. The first one, as we understand, took place in Africa and it went into Spain. There was a Spanish historian who watched the arrival of the Moors coming to Spain to fight the Visigoths, who are the modern day France, Spanish, and so forth. He says here, let me give you his words. Why do our history books don't tell you this? This is a historian who saw the invasion come. We understand what happened in Andalus because the Jews wrote a letter and talked about what happened to them there. And the Muslims decided to go because we're supposed to fight for justice, not only for the Muslims, for anybody. And he went in to take reign because of the persecution was going there, take over the land. Here's what the historian said. The reigns of the Moors, horses were fire, their faces black as pitch, their eyes shone like burning candles, their horses were swift as leopards, their riders fiercer than a wolf in sheepfold at night. This is a historian, a Spanish Visigoth, who saw the first invasion. This closes the book of the books we read now. We see the Moors as white-skinned, some even with blonde hair, some with pointy faces, with the pointy beards and so forth and so on, and they're called Moors because they never want you to know that that empire that was started there was black. And we know it was black because we know the history of Morocco. Here they talked about how our brother went to the south to get the soldiers. And if you go south of Morocco, especially, even Morocco is full of black people, but you still go further south to West Africa into the Senegambian region, the people are black. They've never been white. So I don't know where these racist historians got these things from, but we understand why. But here, the first of the sultanates begin to take place. It's about 711, 714. And the brothers who came in there were black as pitch. The Moors, black as pitch. That means our brothers from the Senegambia region were the genesis of the Andalus Empire. That's right. They weren't Europeans. They were black men. They were African, our African ancestors. And on top of that, they created a race of people called the Melungeons. I talked about them before. You cannot have a Melungeon if you have two white folks, two Tubobs marrying, having children. Melungeon comes because there was a black father and a white mother. And they created a new race of people in that region, Andalus, called the Melungeons. That's right. That also shows that the people were black from the beginning. This empire ran, as you know, from 714 to about 1430, 1450, and then he was finally defeated by the Spain because, again, he ran away from the Sharia. And one of the famous of the parts of the empire came around about the 10th century, the Murabi Tomb. Again, now we have one of my favorite heroes, Yusuf, Josephine, Rahim Allah. He was some kind of jihad. I mean, his jihad was strong. And if you read the letter that he sent to the Spanish, I mean, it was in Arabic. He sent a letter to the Spanish before he went there to kick their butts. This is in the 10th century because why? At this time, they start going away from the Sharia. What happens when Subhanahu wa ta'ala see you run away from the Sharia, he remove his hand. And again, just like you see today, they begin to run the Andalus because Andalus now begin to split into fiefdoms and so forth, so on. Each one have its own emir. And so when Murabi Tomb decided to come in there, they were going to bring the Sharia back and to stop all of the debauchery and everything was going on. But Josephine sent a letter to the king of Spain. And when I see the movie, I sometimes I laugh till I must cry because the verbiage that he said in it, you had to be one bad brother to talk like this. And he backed it up because he went in there and kicked their butts. Not only one time, he kicked their butts twice. And he drove them back up to the north, and he consolidated Andalus again for at least another 200 years. And then, of course, by the time they began to weaken, and another group came in. But this particular people they call the Murabi Tomb, if you do research on them, they were some beautiful brothers. And the start of it, they were something. This is the start of the first of the African sultanates. And it was beautiful. One of the richest in history, Portugal. You look it up. Andalus. Are people involved in that? Our brothers was involved in that. Yeah, something to be proud about. One of the richest in world history, Portugal, was our brothers. That's the first. Now, let's leave Andalus and come back into the African continent. Now we start to get into our parts of West Africa. We had the Mali Empire. And if you look at West Africa, you see it's full of gold mines and so forth, and the riches that came out of that. And of course, we know also the Songhai, which was very close to connected and offshoot of the Mali Empire. And the richest man of history was not Bloomberg. He was not Trump. He was not a European or Tuba from Sweden or from England or Ireland. He was not Japanese. He was one of our ancestors, Mansa Musa. He had one of the richest known empires that this world has ever known. That's right. Again, if you see and you read about our brothers and sisters, how they managed their kingdoms, you've seen women not being mistreated, dressed in beautiful clothing. The sisters were proud. The men were proud. And there was so much wealth that when he went on to Hajj, everybody knows about this story. He put masjids all through the Sahara. So if you look at a map, you see Mali, okay, where today, and you look at a map, it's going towards Saudi Arabia. He went across that whole desert. He put masjids everywhere. Some are still standing today. And he left so much gold everywhere. And so again, my dear brothers and sisters, to make a point, you have something to be proud about because we did something on African empire, on our African continent. And our empires were some of the richest in history. We had the richest man in history, Mansa Musa, the richest man declared in history. I forgot his wealth. It was, I forgot, near trillions of dollars. I forgot now what it was. It's ungodly what they estimated his wealth was. It's just ungodly. You couldn't spend that much money in your lifetime. But again, we had that. Now, let's go into some of the others. We had, again, the Songhai, Mali, Songhai, West Africa offshoots, the empires. And I'm going to give you personalities. Askia Mohammed. He governed by the Sharia. That's right. He governed by the Sharia. Now, they said Sunni Ali was kind of like in between. This is what was reported. But he did use the Sharia, Sunni Ali. These are ancestral brothers, strong Black African men, sultans who were strong, and he was strong under the Sharia, and they were strong Muslims, and their nations were full of faith. And again, when the Europeans came, and even the Arab historians come, you always look at the balance in the country. Remember, as I said, when you see high iman, faith, and you see very low debauchery, very low, you know that country's healthy. This is what they wrote. They didn't find the debauchery that you find in other parts of Africa at this time. They didn't find the debauchery. They found very little, and it was enforced. If you were involved in the debauchery, you were enforced by the Sharia. And that's very, very important aspect. Again, is that our empires, we had high iman and the debauchery was low. See, now the historians don't want to talk about that as well, but I'm here to talk about it and for you to do your research, because my brothers and sisters, let me tell you something. We had some dynamite ancestors. We had not only we had brothers, but we had sisters as well. And they were educated and they were strong in faith, and they ran their sultanates with a firm hand under subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they prospered. Let me give you an example about, again, I'm kind of moving away a little bit from West Africa. I'm going back to Morocco. You know, Murabi Tomb, you know how they made millions? Through agriculture. In the 10th century, they had one product that I always talk about this, especially my wife. I'm always amazed by it. They took dates. Okay, everybody know what dates are, right? Okay, and Arabic they call tamar. They took dates and they did something to the date to dry it. Do you know that this particular paste would last you 6 months? Some said to a year without refrigeration. And so the troops, when they were going on excursions and so forth, when they go travel, they took a bunch of this paste with them. And if anyone who reads about the dates, you know the nourishment behind it. People laugh in the United States about dates, but let me tell you something. It's one of the most nutritious foods you can find. It's got the balance of sugar, minerals, and so forth and so on. And you can eat that protein and it'll keep you alive. It found its way all the way into England. Interesting, huh? And they made millions off agriculture. That's right. So my dear brothers and sisters, you know, not only they made riches off gold, but also by agriculture. Now, getting back to, I want to give you another one too. This is one of my favorite also. This brother was rough. The Kana Bornu Empire of Idris Aloma. I showed this picture, I think it was last week. This brother ran an empire that was something. He was a Mujahid deluxe. His empire was very wealthy, and he could not stand disbelief. He fought it. If you were practicing African religions, he didn't tolerate it. If he found any place where there was disbelief inside his empire, he went, he cleaned it out. And those that were near his empire, he cleaned that out as well. And he had an empire that was massive. Idris Aloma, I think I mentioned him last week. This brother was a fighter. And there's a picture of him too that I found very interesting. That showed him with a massive sword. I mean, he was a big brother, big, strong brother, okay, African brother. And he had a big sword, and his jihad was very, very strong. If you look at his empire, you found something that was very interesting too. You found schools. And the schools were what? They had women and men. Women had their schools and the men had their schools. That's why this empire again flourished. The same formula again. You have the Iman and low debauchery. And you had educated and beautiful sisters who gave birth to beautiful children who were also educated, and it kept the empire going. So this particular empire in particular, I like it because I liked Idris Aloma because some of the words he had and some of the things he said that, you know, I smile because a man that confident to talk, he was rough. And you know how some brothers can be, you know, those kind of brothers are tough. He's one of them. And I say our dear sister, Amina was talking about there are many honored sultans. Africa so powerful from Morocco into South Africa. It's true. All the way across Africa, we had sultans all over the place. I'm concentrating mostly on West Africa and North Africa because we'd be here for days upon days talking about all of the empires that occurred and during this stretch of time. Now we'll get into, I'm going to leave the African continent. I'm going to talk about something that many of you may not know or you might have heard about, but it's true. Not only did our African brothers become sultans in Africa under powerful regimes, they created powerful sultanates. But they also created sultanates in India. Yes, that's right. There were 4 from the Habasha, Ethiopia, Eritrea region as we know it today. There were 4 sultans of India. Because remember something, India was ruled under Muslim law for what, 1,000 years. And many of the Indian historians, remember you heard me say about when I was in college, I took a course in India because I wanted to learn more about these brothers. And they somehow or another, she went from all the way from the beginning of BC, before Christ, so to speak. And then when we got to the Islamic period, she went over it. I mean, 1,000 years, she went past it. So I should have raised my hand in class and said, hey, what about this, and she ignored it. But anyway, the famous of the 4 of the sultans was Malik Ambar. And these sultanates were very wealthy as well. We had African, Muslim, Mujahideen soldiers in India. That's right. And 4 of them became sultans. And now the history is starting to come out. Some of the Indian historians are mentioning this fact as well. But I still don't like some of them. They want to still throw dirt at us by saying that we came in as dirt slaves and so forth and so on. But you find it kind of hard to believe how a dirt slave has no education, no nothing, all of a sudden becomes sultan of a powerful emirate in India. How can that be? He had to be something more than just a dirt slave or field hand or something like that, or a house Negro. But they kind of mention that kind of to dampen what their accomplishment, what they did do in India. But you never mind that. One of the famous rivers, Ganges, was named after a famous Ethiopian Muslim warrior. So that's another kudo for you, my dear brothers and sisters who do not understand your history, that India also was a Islamic emirate for 1,000 years. And 4 of the sultans were Africans, Black Africans. That's right. From the East African region of what we call Ethiopia today, Eritrea today, and that region there, that's where they came from. And thousands and thousands and thousands of soldiers came there. As a matter of fact, I saw a picture the other day of them, the descendants of these warriors that came there. And they still have their communities still in India. It's very interesting. But now they're more mixed. Of course, their hair is not as kinky. They're more wavy, but you can see the real African features in them. And so, my dear brothers and sisters, I've given you some of the things today about our history. And what is interesting, again, is we are not just slaves. It came on ships, and that's all. And our history began with slavery, with the Tubab giving us his religion to worship. I show you here that Africans under the Sharia, Islamia, ruled West Africa for about 400 and some years, or maybe even longer than that. And that stretch of land, and let me tell you something, Morocco, you know what? You see how I look? You look at you do the research. I showed some pictures in the past. Many of those brothers, I look like them. The Sadiyin and the Alaween in particular, I look a lot like many of those sultans. It's amazing. Amazing. I mean, incredible that I look a lot like many of the sultans there. And many of the people and many of the scholars too. Sometimes I pull up a picture, I'm shocked at what I see. Even my wife, she even looked, and the other people look, whoa, this looks like Yahya. I can't believe this is him. It looks just like him. And so this region of Morocco, they have powerful also emirates, and we can go in a whole class on those empires. But the Sadiyin and Alaween in particular are beautiful Black sultanates in Morocco. And the rulers were something else. And there's one in particular that I love, and it's Jacob Mansour. And he came out of the Sadiyin, and he fought the Portuguese, and he defeated them. And he had so much reverence for his mother, what he would do for his mother before he would go out to fight. And even when he would go out, he had this reverence for his mother. And you look at this man's sultanate, and it was beautiful. And again, another African brother, and he built masjids all over the place. And he was something. And then when you look at the Alaween, I like our brother, the Sultan Rashid. I fell in love with him as I start to study about him. And I saw a picture of him recently, and another two pictures that are very similar. And then I saw some of his relatives, and one in particular, a cousin, a relative to him. If I didn't know right, I thought that was me there in the 16th century. I was shocked when I saw. I saw this drawing. I looked at this brother. He was related to Rashid in the Alaween. I looked just like him. I mean, I look like him. Shocking. And so, I'm kind of wondering now if I think I have some blood here, because there's too many of the sultans and too many of princes and so forth. I look like them a lot. I mean, and even some of the scholars, incredible. Even in Mali too, I look a lot like many of those in the 14th, 15th, 16th century. If you look at the picture I showed, I think last week, of the Mali's imam, he reminded me of my father. He looks a lot like my father, but I have some facial features like him as well. So this is something, my brothers and sisters, is beautiful. So why should I have to imitate anybody else? I'm African. Why should I have to imitate anybody else? We have many to emulate. Our sisters, why do they need to emulate Beyonce or the other people? You have sisters, if you read their history, that give you something to be proud of. And they were chaste women on top of that. And so I prefer to follow my ancestors. That's right. Why do I need to follow basketball players or something? I'm not making light on that. But I prefer to follow righteous men of our ancestors. And we have many. I prefer to look like them. I prefer to read how they did their lives and how they governed. This is what I'm trying to get at with you, my dear brothers and sisters. Why I'm a stickler about the Sharia? Because my ancestors were as well. And when they governed the Sharia, it was beautiful. And they were our ancestors. We have something to be proud of. And they were literate. That literacy was carried into America when they became slaves. Some of the slave revolts that happened over there, they found documents. How did they communicate? Through Arabic language. They wrote letters, and the man transported it to other plantations, and many they wrote in Arabic language. That's right. The literacy in the African empires, the Muslim African empires, is off the charts. And when you talk about Mali, in particular Timbuktu, as we always talk about the scholars inside there. If you look at there's another scholar in there. I want to talk about him another time. My brothers and sisters, I'm gonna tell you something. When I look at him, I get to laughing, because he's the same complexion as me. He has the same beard as me. His emo is like mine. And so I stepped right into the 16th century. I was there. And he has my same kind of build, even facial features. I saw these pictures. I'm just shocked at what I see. He was a big scholar out of Timbuktu. So, my dear brothers and sisters, I prefer to follow my ancestors. And I won't apologize for that. I'm happy that Subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving me this religion. And also, I'm happy that he gave us these ancestors. I'm proud of my ancestors. I pray for them. I am honored that I look like them. I am honored to take their mantle and to try to live by the Sharia. I'm honored to emulate them, not to emulate the others. Why? I don't need that. Because if I'm troubled, I need something, I have ancestors to emulate. And it's not only in Africa. I have Malcolm in the United States to emulate. And Malcolm was a stickler about the Sharia as well. You may not know that, but he was. So we have many brothers to emulate. And so in closing, my dear brothers and sisters, remember here, Subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards those who govern and use his law in all aspects of life: marriage, schooling, criminal law, banking system, agriculture, all of that. You use this will give you prosperity. He has mentioned this in here. He will not let you down. And we see that because some of the most richest empires the world has ever known, it was Muslim and under the Sharia. Under the Sharia. So we know now that the Sharia is more than just taking off somebody's head. It's a way of life. And I'll give you some things that you can study about now, and that you can to do your research and see how important it is to be governed by God's law and to keep God's law, Subhanahu wa ta'ala's law. And you try to do it, even if you live in the West, you try to do it as best as you can. And you try to follow God's law. You can't go wrong when you do that. Yes, we're going to stumble here. Yes, we're going to sin there. But you know what? We try to always go back to it. And so I give you some things, my dear brothers and sisters, that will help you in learning about the Islamic law, because it is so important. And a Muslim cannot understand his relationship with Subhanahu wa ta'ala. He cannot actually understand his faith without understanding the Sharia as well. And so I gave you some of that today, my dear brothers and sisters. I gave you some of the proofs of the Quran. You can study that. And then you can study those beautiful empires that I talked about as well, and get enjoyment out of it. It has brought me enjoyment over the years, reading about our ancestors in Africa and even in India. There were 4 sultans there. You read about them, especially Malik Ambar, India. We had brothers governing there as well. And they governed beautiful sultanates inside India as well. We had brothers who governed in Andalus in modern day Spain as well. We have something to be proud of, my brothers and sisters. We have something to be very proud of. And I gave you some of that today. Why you see the smile on my face when I talk about them. I'm happy because I know that I can pick up a book and find that happiness to know my ancestors, how they were, and how we didn't swing only from trees, and we were in caves, and we were stupid as the rocks. No, I have something that I can read that tells us something different. So I want to acknowledge, thank you, my dear sister Jahari, for showing up today. I appreciate it, my dear sister. Thank you for coming. And so I gave you some things today, my brothers and sisters, about our beautiful Sharia, our law, Islamic law. And I gave you some of the beautiful empires, some of the information about the beautiful empires that we had, and some personalities as well. And so, our dear brothers and sisters, I hope you read about your ancestors and learn about your ancestors, how they governed and how they lived their lives. And that's important. Even if you're Muslim and non-Muslim, that you should pay homage to your ancestors, those who were on this African continent and who governed under God's law. And you should be proud of that. And so, my dear brothers and sisters, there's any questions here. Yes, my dear brother Isaac, studying brings joy. When you study and you find something and you debunk the racist and their narrative about us as Black people, African people, it's something. You see the smile on my face, because I was back in the hood, I'd be using other language, if you know what I mean, to describe the Tubab and how they treat us. But that's another story. But I'm happy because I know I've given you some stories today about these empires, and I'm happy about that. And thank you, my dear sister Amina, for coming, and my dear sister Abina as well, my Compton sister here as well, because I'm from Compton, California, And oh yeah, thank you, my sister here, Ojwini. Thank you for showing up. Thank you very much. I'm happy that Subhanahu wa Ta'ala has given me this time. He's given me knowledge so I can give this to all of you. And what I have, like I told you, I always give. I do not hold back on it, and I try to give you what I can. And this is my pledge, and this is what we're supposed to do as Muslims. But not only that, as all elders supposed to give this knowledge, pass it on to others so they can pass it on to other generations, because we've been lacking that. And so, my dear brothers and sisters, you know, our history is so rich. I'm happy. I'm happy that we have such a history, and I'm keep it all the way to my grave, knowing that we had these empires and we had these beautiful brothers and sisters on the continent. And, you know, the joy of knowing that cannot be understated here. And also, I want to explain something, and I'm gonna close. You know, you guys should also research about Morocco. Morocco is a very interesting country, and the people are diverse, as you heard me talk about many times before. But the African history is very well entrenched here in Morocco by you looking at the empires. They were governed by black men all the way until about the 17th century. Then they become lighter, and now they look more like the modern Arab-like type. But even those, their grandmothers and grandfathers were black Africans, so they're still considered as black men. But you should read about their history as well, because it's very, very interesting. And the scholarship here in Morocco is off the charts as well. So, my dear brothers and sisters, thank you for showing up today for this important lesson here on the Sharia Islamia and our empires that were governed under the Sharia Islamia by our ancestor brothers and sisters. Well, thank you for showing up. And as always, I always pray that Subhanahu wa Ta'ala will protect us, and those living in the bad environment of the United States, that you're protected when you go to work, and that you come home in safety and you come back to your families, and that Subhanahu wa Ta'ala will find it in his heart to give you faith, and he will bring you hopefully to the right way, as he says here in the Quran, and that he protect all our children as they leave to go out, and protect us also from this virus, because it's killing. And my dear brothers and sisters, that's important, because this virus knows no color. He kills anyone and everyone, regardless of who you are. So I hope Subhanahu wa Ta'ala protects us from this particular virus, and keep us strong as a race of people as well, and as a human being, to keep us from this virus, and that he will give us also from his goodness our prosperity, because we have 400 years where we have been denied this prosperity. And I'm hoping in time Subhanahu wa Ta'ala will grant us this prosperity that we need and we deserve. So, my dear brothers and sisters, thank you for showing up. I appreciate it. And as usual, I'll leave you with the words of Jinnah, of paradise. Salamu alaikum, rahmatullahi barakatuh.